McKenna believed that the King-Wen sequence had been specifically ordered in this sequence for a reason. For example, in each pair of hexagrams, the second is either the opposite of the previous one, where all lines are reversed, or it is an inversion of the previous one. Also, when McKenna counted the amount of lines that changed from each hexagram to the next, the number was never 5. The number sequence was produced by analyzing the number of these line changes, then graphing them, and combining a forward with a backward running graph that was then combined, analyzed, converted, and then reanalyzed at 3 levels and recombined to produce a set of 384 numbers. The wave showed all the change or novelty in the universe, from the beginning of time to the end of time. Unlike a normal graph, the wave goes down rather than up. Since novelty theory presumes there is a maximum novelty value, this is represented by the baseline of the graph. The line goes up towards habit, events that have already occurred, and down towards novelty, events that have not happened before. The graph hits the baseline and signifies a maximum novelty state only twice, at the start and end of the graph, or the beginning and end of time. Maximum novelty value is therefore 0, which is why the original time wave was called time wave 0.
So in order to correlate the time wave to history to find out where we were on the wave, Terence had to find a very novel event to correlate to a large spike on the wave, a dip into novelty. And he chose the explosion of the bomb at Hiroshima in 1945, presumably a very novel event that had never happened before on planet Earth. It's the explosion of a nuclear device over a populated city. And once he'd correlated that to the date when the bomb went off, that spike on the wave, it then turned out to be 64 of these 13-month Earth lunar years, the 64 384-day cycles between that spike in 1945 and when the novelty hits its maximum at the end of the graph. That's when the line hits the baseline. From that point on, he then got hold of a man called Peter Mayan, who helped him develop the software so that this could be looked at on a computer and they could zero in on any particular part of the graph and see where we were in the graph going towards habit or novelty and get some idea of how history was progressing. And he called it the transcendental objects at the end of time. And he actually thought that that was sending out waves back into history and causing all history to happen as a sort of preparation towards this one event. After McKenna and Peter Mayan realized that the Mayan calendar ends just 34 days after this I Ching time wave in 2012, the I Ching having been going for thousands of years longer than the Mayan calendar, and the Mayan calendar has got at least 2,500 years since its beginning point. They then decided perhaps they should incorporate that Mayan endpoint as one possibility into the software, so you can actually choose whether you want the 17th of November as the end date or the 21st December 2012, just to see the differences and experiment with seeing where we are on the novelty wave.
If true, then one conclusion could be that so many new things happen one after the other at such rapid intervals until this one point in time when the system is no longer able to cope. It's what many scholars have termed a paradigm shift, but which McKenna saw as a singularity.
A singularity means a point where some property becomes infinite.
Right, a singularity is exactly what Peter Russell called the centre of his white hole in time.
In astronomical terms, a singularity is a point where actually density becomes infinite, and this is very much so like in a black hole or at the time of the Big Bang.
He'd measured the accelerating knowledge of humanity and came up with a time spiral that spirals into itself. And his ideas were based on the ideas of Teilhard de Chardin, who was a paleontologist and also a Jesuit priest. What de Chardin had come up with was something called a complexity consciousness theory. His theory was that with the increasing sizes of the brain cavities of hominids, that is the man-like creatures, over the millennia, that consciousness increases according to the size of the brain cavity.
Peter Russell realized that there are 10,000 million, or 10 to the power of 10 atoms in a neuron, and the same number of neurons in the human cortex of the brain. We are now at a population level of well over 10 to the power of 9, approaching the critical number to 10 to the 10, coming much sooner than de Chardin predicted. Russell thinks this is the omega point. Could we soon be seeing this shift, where individual units link and become functioning parts of a larger organ, the global brain? Russell's analysis of history is depicted as a spiral centered on a paradox. Theoretically, a spiral goes on forever, yet converges on a point or single moment. Russell calls this process of acceleration compression, comparing it to the evolution of a star that compresses until it becomes a singularity or black hole. The center of the spiral is called the white hole in time, and having later realized the common points with McKenna's time wave, Russell located the singularity in 2012.
Even though McKenna was focusing on 2012 as this singularity, this event in time whereby something were to happen, he didn't actually envisage it as the end of the world. He realized that 2012 was a milestone, but he felt that time was going to continue, but just that something else was going to happen. And for him, his thinking is very much on par with Carl Gustav Jung. Jung actually always said that the UFO phenomena, which was happening since 1947, actually was here because of the age of Aquarius. And the age of Aquarius is very much speak of the 1950s and the 1960s. But what Jung was calling the age of Aquarius and what we might be calling the 2012 phenomenon is very much similar, if not identical. It's about this hope for a new world, and specifically it's not about the end of the world, it's about something new, a new dimension, a new shift in human life and civilization.
Robert Anton Wilson started to study the work of a French economist called Georges Andelard, who had tried to ascertain the amount of time it takes for information to double. Andelard originally took the amount of knowledge at the time of Christ and then measured how long it took to double and double and double again. But Wilson took the study much further, and he ended up taking it back to around 40,000 BC for the start point, and then the time it took for the knowledge to double was around the Bronze Age, and then it doubled again by around 1 AD. And then the doubling time gets shorter and shorter and shorter, and just after 2012 the whole situation goes vertical. It produces an asymptotic curve where the graph goes vertical around 2012. Wilson realised that his own study paralleled Terence McKenna's results with the time wave, but although he's not a conservative man by any means, he said he found it too incredible to believe that quantum leaps of evolution could accelerate to the levels that were implied in the time wave, although his own study did in fact correlate precisely to that idea. Because what is implied by the time wave is that around the last few seconds, those evolutionary jumps will occur around 1 million per second.
Now obviously the space-time continuum is where we are working and living in. Time travel is something which, again, science fiction talks about very much, but science is actually unsure whether time travel can actually exist. And the only time travel we might actually be able to do is actually in the mind. Whether we are actually physically stuck in this space and time is something which we don't have an answer for, and however much we have progressed over the last few decades, science-wise, actually a key question still remains unanswered.
McKenna considered the possibility that in 2012 the first time machine will be invented, and that at that point suddenly many time machines will arrive from the future because they won't be able to travel back further than the invention of the first time machine. But that did bring up the problem of the grandfather paradox, which says that if you go back in time and kill your own grandfather, then you don't exist. So he decided that the answer was that the machines wouldn't all turn up, but that somehow that the invention of the first time machine would be a gateway to eternity.
Time travel is only going to happen potentially in the mind. That brings us to certain questions, and it's there that we might have to reevaluate the role of shamanism, because shamans, the old priests of the tribes, are the only ones who actually have studied this in practical terms, if not in scientific terms. They were the ones who literally went out of their mind and saw and tried to experience what it was for the mind to be outside of the body. And ever since, and specifically since 1947, remote viewers, which are government employees who've been trained and helped both by the CIA and their Russian counterparts by the KGB, have been trying to explore this area as well. And interestingly enough, the evidence seems to suggest that material is able to come from there, and that these people are able to access information otherwise unavailable to us.
Several people have claimed in the remote viewing community that they come up against a block in 2012 which is apparently known as the discontinuity amongst the remote viewers. They're not all exactly agreed onto what happens when they get there. Some of them say it's a brick wall, they can't get beyond it. Some of them say there's a certain period they can't get beyond, but then they can get beyond further down the line, and others say that it's all hazy and there's not so many people around. You know, there's various versions of it.
So we have got this thing whereby space and time continuum seems to be reduced to our mind, and the question, what is our mind? Now, we are slowly discovering brain chemistry, neurology and all of these things, but very much about the brain still remains an unexplored frontier. If anything, we've explored outer space, but inner space is still lacking. And again, if there is a challenge for 2012, it might actually be that we need to start exploring inner space and inner realities.
As futuristic as it may be, psychologist Julian Jaynes wrote about such an idea in his 1976 book, The Origin of Consciousness in the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. He made the case that what he labeled the bicameral mentality was the normal state of the human mind worldwide as recently as 3,000 years ago. In short, he claimed that our brain once functioned totally differently. He argued